Marianne Azaro. You've heard my voice several times over the last many months, and so it's great to see you virtually here on this afternoon's webinar. We are thrilled to be here today to have the initial training in a training series for the Moving to Work expansion, and today's training session will focus on waivers. Next slide, please. So with me today are some really exciting presenters. First, you will hear from one of my team members, Chris Golden, one of the MTW specialists on the Moving to Work team here at HUD. And then you will also hear from several MTW agency representatives, including one person, Jennifer Rainwater, who had been at an MTW agency and is now and has come over to HUD, and we're thrilled to have her here. And you'll hear from Chris Lombardi from the Lincoln Housing Authority and Karen Kritzberg from Boulder. And Karen, I apologize if I butchered your name there. So today we are going to really talk about waivers. We want to be providing basic information about what is an MTW waiver as it relates to the expansion. What are they? What are the different types of waivers? What are some different ideas in how to go about getting soliciting input from your public stakeholders, residents, community stakeholders, and the like. And then also, as I mentioned, you will hear specifically from 3 legacy agencies, and you'll be able to ask us and ask Karen and Chris and Jennifer a lot of questions as well. And then finally, we will have a guided conversation. Towards the end of the conversation, we'll ask you a couple questions, one as a poll, one as a discussion, and then we will also have a guided discussion. I should indicated if at any point during the presentation today you have any questions that you would like us to talk about at that specific time or towards the end, please go ahead and submit that question via the Q&A box, and we will address it either kind of in real time, or we'll make sure to try to provide a response to all the questions towards the end and hopefully have some sort of guided conversation. And so with that, we are thrilled to get started with the conversation, and I would like to just remind you, next slide, please. Next, prior to today's conversation, I'm sure that you've all read through the MTW operations notice, which you will find on HUD's web the MTW expansion website. There's a lot of really good information on the MTW website, and one of them is the operations notice. The operations notice was published in the Federal Register, and we've reformatted it for ease of reference, and you can find that on the website. It's section 6. And then also on the website, you can find everything that you need to know specific to your cohort that you're applying to. For cohort 1, MTW flexibility, and cohort 2, rent reform. So I definitely encourage you to check out the MTW expansion website if you haven't already. Next slide, please. And then also, as we've told you, and hopefully you already know, that we have provided, and thanks to ICF, we have provided a training resource center that should cover pretty much anything that you need to know about the MTW operations notice. Today's webinar will focus on key points about waivers, but there's also a lot more information about waivers, both on the training, in the training series on the website, as well as in the MTW operations notice. And hopefully prior to today's conversation, you've had an opportunity to read section 4 of the MTW operations notice, as well as look at the appendix of all of the various waivers, and that you've come here with your questions ready to go. And again, I really strongly encourage you to become very familiar with the ops notice, with the training module on the website, and any questions that you have, feel free to ask them today, whether it's verbally or through the Q&A box. You can always feel free to reach out to us as well via email, and we'll answer any questions that we're able to. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to Chris Golden. Again, Chris Golden is one of the Housing Innovation Specialists here on the MTW team in HUD headquarters, and Chris is going to provide you with an overview about the waivers. Chris? And
All
Chris,
right, can everybody
Golden, yep, we're there. Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Go ahead.
Great. Whole two mute buttons thing is a little confusing. All right, the waivers. I believe we don't need to stick on the slide. Can we go to the next one? Great, thank you. Okay, so what is a waiver? The waivers are one of the tools that MTW provides to help agencies better address their local housing needs by allowing them greater flexibility. They permit certain exemptions from existing public housing and HCV program requirements, which allows agencies to implement activities that otherwise would not be allowable. There are many different waivers. Some very basic examples would be things like a tiered rent policy or a standardized deduction. Waivers like this could in turn be combined into something like, say, a rent simplification initiative. So you can combine waivers to create larger initiatives as well. On to the next slide. So there are 4 sort of different types of waivers. Before we get into each of them, 2 quick side notes. So if you'll notice, MTW waivers, sort of the first category, is only really one of 4. So they're a specific sort of type of waiver. They would be the waivers found in the operations notice. They do not encompass all waivers. And also be aware of the sort of safe harbors that come with these waivers. Those are additional requirements that must be followed when implementing MTW waivers. They're designed to ensure that residents are not unduly harmed by the waivers, and when we get into safe harbor waivers, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so on to the 4 types. MTW waivers, as I said, are found in Appendix 1. And of the operations notice, they are also in the all available waivers section of the MTW Expansion Training. We have divided them into 17 categories, things like landlord incentives and PVV flexibilities, and they encompass more than 70 sort of pre-approved waivers. So you do not need to seek additional approval to implement the activities described in these waivers. However, prior to implementation, you must meet any associated safe harbors with that waiver. This could include things like an impact analysis or developing a hardship policy. You must first include the waivers you wish to implement in your MTW supplement to the PHA plan, and as applicable, update the ACOP or administrative plan to account for them. So those are the MTW. We also have safe harbor waivers. So as mentioned earlier, safe harbors are things like, for instance, there's a cap on the amount you can charge for minimum rent or the amount you can pay out in landlord incentives. Certain safe harbors like those 2, you can request a waiver of for good cause. However, there are also safe harbors that are marked with an asterisk in the operations notice, and these cannot be waived. Those are things like conducting an impact analysis or developing a hardship policy. Those are the 2 most common safe harbors that cannot be waived. We also have the agency-specific waivers. Now, these would be if an agency is interested in waiving a requirement of the Housing Act of 1937 that is not offered under the operations notice. This does not extend to other laws, just the Housing Act. They can request that through sort of the agency-specific waiver process. So this would allow an agency to go beyond the pre-approved waivers and propose sort of new and innovative activities to meet their specific local needs. Over time, we would expect that some of these new ideas would be adopted and tested by additional MTW agencies. When that happens, we would consider sort of including them in the operations notice. And then maybe even further in the future, we could see these become best practices for all PHAs. Things like less frequent income recertifications, which are part of HOTMA, is something that was tested for a while with our existing MTW agencies before it found its way there. Lastly, we have cohort-specific waivers. Now, these are unique to the expansion cohort and would be given to aid in that cohort's sort of study objectives. If applicable, they would be outlined in their respective selection notices. So there are no cohort waivers for cohorts 1 or 2. And more information about cohorts 3, 4, and 5 and whether or not they would have any such waivers will be coming soon. All right, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, public engagement. So MTW is about sort of thinking critically about what you want to accomplish, and engaging with your residents and community stakeholders is a very important part of that process. Getting buy-in from your community for your activities is a cornerstone to a successful program. And we know, and we've seen in the past, that when sort of buy-in isn't accomplished, there can be a lot of pushback or confusion about sort of what a resident's responsibilities are under the new policy. And so this can be avoided with more engagement on the front end. Further, residents and your community stakeholders bring a lot of perspectives to the table that can help improve your activities before you get them off the ground. We know that a lot of our legacy agencies credit a lot of their success to good community engagement. And some final notes on engagement in general: there is additional public engagement required when implementing the agency-specific and safe harbor waivers. The expansion training outlines this process. And public involvement beyond these requirements, while not required, can continue to be an asset to your program. And we encourage you to do the amount of public involvement you think is most appropriate for your community. Certain activities can certainly benefit from more than others. And that should be everything. The next slide, I think, is back to Mary Ann, perhaps.
I will take it. Thanks, Chris. And so again, MTW is really a way to help you kind of think differently and to really get out of that statutory regulatory box. And so through the MTW waivers, the safe harbor waivers, the agency-specific waivers, there's really a multitude of ways that you would be able to waive, the 1937 Act and implementing regulations. And so Chris talked about that. And seeking and how to think about crafting what your MTW activity might be using those waivers is really important. It's really important to, obviously, we're in one of the questions for the next set of presenters. One of the questions is, what types of stakeholders should we remember to seek out? So I'm going to ask Chris and Karen and Jenny to talk about that when you're talking. But it's really important to think about how to use MTW to address whatever is happening locally in your community. And so now I'd really like to turn to the 3 legacy agencies that they can really talk to what they did and how they used MTW. So Chris and Karen and Jenny will talk about some insights about how they thought through the waivers through their MTW activities. They'll talk about kind of the mechanics of how they put their activities together and how that might be different from what they were doing as a traditional non-MTW agency. And while the specifics and how to access that MTW waiver might be a little bit different for MTW expansion agencies as it was for the current legacy agencies, or how you access the waiver through the attachment 1 waivers versus an agency-specific or a safe harbor waiver, while that might be different, what MTW allows you to do is to be really creative in how you think about how to do business, and then given the tools that we are providing through the ops notice, we can help you get there. So right now, I would like to turn it over to Chris Lamberti, who is the Executive Director of the Lincoln Housing Authority. Chris, go ahead, and don't forget to take your phone off mute, which is easy to do. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, I think I'm off mute. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Great, thanks.
And welcome to all the future MTWs out there listening. Thank you for applying. I think I speak for all the current MTW agencies when I say that we're really excited to see the expansion rolling out. We've been waiting for it. We think MTW is a great program, and we're excited to have a whole new group of agencies join the fold. The beauty of moving to work, as Mary Ann was talking about, is that you are designing your programs around your local context, around the issues that you have with your resident population and within your agency and within your community. So really, none of us today can tell you what the right initiatives are, or what the right rent policy is, or what you really need to pursue. It's something you've got to go through a process and work through that on your own. What I've been asked to do today is talk a little bit about what our processes have been to figure that out and what some of our public engagement has been. And I'm going to do that in terms of our rent policy, because all moving to work agencies relook and redesign their rent policy and are giving a lot of newfound freedom in that regard. So I thought it would just be good to touch base on some of the processes we went through when we were redesigning our rent policy. So briefly, we're an original MTW agency, which means we started in the late 1990s. And there was no moving to work when we started, so we didn't really have a lot of other agencies or an ops notice that listed 70 waivers in it to look at and glean ideas from. Rather, we started really with an internal staff working group, and we've done that several times since over the years, and I still think that's the best way to do it. And I would strongly recommend that. I assume most of you probably are already doing something along those lines or similar. It doesn't have to be entirely internal. You can bring in outside partners. But I would really encourage you to work on brainstorming sessions around certain goals and with a working group. And do not review with that working group what everyone else is doing and moving to work already. I firmly believe internally, I don't really go through what all the other agencies' waivers are when we're working internally to figure out new directions we want to go in. If you sit down and just read the ops notice with a big committee of staff, you're going to be so bogged down in the ifs, ands, and buts of every waiver that you won't really get down to the nitty-gritty of what is it that you're trying to achieve for your local agency and your residents in your community. The idea is to brainstorm around a series of ideas and then go back and look at what other MTW agencies are already doing around those ideas to get some additional information, and then go, in my mind, and then go look at the operations notice and figure out how you can make that operations notice work for what you actually want to do. So for us, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we did in that regard around rent. We started a brainstorming session, multiple meetings, and landed with a few key concepts. One of which is we wanted the same rent system for all our residents. We have about a 50-50 mix of elderly and disabled and work-able families, and we thought we wanted the same rent structure. We didn't want different rent structures for different groups. We wanted to keep an income-based rent structure, which we have, only we wanted to simplify it as much as possible. We wanted to build an idea for a work expectation into our rent structure. That was a big focus back in the late 90s when moving to work first came around, was how do you build in incentives or expectations for work. And importantly, we wanted our rent change to be revenue neutral. We weren't trying to lower our HAP costs or increase our HAP costs or lower tenant payments or raise tenant payments in the aggregate. We wanted to mostly be revenue neutral. So those were kind of where we landed after a series of brainstorming sessions. So we took those basic ideas and then we started modeling rent structures and really trying to look at the impact. And we did that by dumping income and rent and deductions and every little data point you can think of for every household in our program in Excel spreadsheets, and began just modeling different rent structures, different percentages of income, which is what was primarily our focus. Where we landed, long story short, was 27% of gross income with no deductions is our basic kind of standard rent policy that we implemented now 10 years ago now. It really works well for us. When we modeled it compared to multiple other percentages, it was in the aggregate revenue neutral, meaning it wasn't substantially increasing our costs or our resident costs. However, we also, one thing everyone on the call will know is when you change your rent structure, you will change what your residents pay. So it is not necessarily revenue neutral for every resident. So one of the things we looked at really closely was what was the range of change for each individual resident. And one of the reasons we liked where we landed was because for about 85% of our residents, the level of change was fairly small. They were all within a range of $0 to $10 paying more or $0 to $10 paying less. The majority were paying less, but they were all within a fairly narrow range, so the level of change wasn't significantly different. in our system for the residents at that time. But there was some outliers that were going to have a significant increase in rent, and we were able to quickly identify the smaller number of that group and then really dig into what was the cause of that. Obviously, they were getting very, very large deductions, and we wanted to kind of sort through and think about the best way to handle that. We then rolled all that out to our resident advisory board and really spent multiple meetings week after week doing Rent 101 with our resident advisory boards and walked through with a whiteboard and markers, old school way, different very specific rent calculations and how what we were proposing to do was different than what we had been doing before. Showed them how it would impact the broad range of residents and that narrow range of change, and then really focused in on the outliers, the group that would be more significantly impacted. Through that process, our resident advisory board really bought in. They liked the proposed system better. They thought it was simpler. They thought it was more fair. But they obviously were concerned about the group of residents who could pay more. And they really liked to think about, they really liked it because they couldn't quite figure out how people with the exact same income paid wildly different amounts of rent. And so they liked the idea of a rent structure where that did not occur. Where they really, really helped us was in designing a phase-in. We went back and forth with them about that group of residents who would pay more, and really the resident advisory board was really, really helpful to design a phase-in process where we lessen the impact of those increases, or at least spread them out over a long number of years. That allowed them to really have buy-in to the rent structure, and it gave us really some good ideas for how to do phase-ins, which we've copied ever since. So that was one of the best experiences we've had working with our resident advisory board. At that point, we then rolled our rent policy out to the broader community partners. And our focus on when we want to roll bigger things out under our Moving to Work program, we're primarily focused on our nonprofit community, primarily the human service agencies and advocates that are working with the same population we're working with, who are trying to access our programs. And we do it in the form of workshops. We don't do community brainstorming sessions, and we don't really get into the nitty-gritty of moving to work with other community agencies. Maybe a few close partners here and there, but not with the broader group as a whole. What we do is we do workshops on how the Housing Authority works. How do you access our programs? How do you get on the waiting list? How do you get a voucher? How does rent calculation work? And within the context of that, we talk about how we have flexibility. And we can design our rent policy a little bit differently. And oh, by the way, this is the one that we're planning, that we're currently thinking about rolling out, that we've vetted with our residents. This is what we think the impact is. What do you think? What was the impact of the people that you're working with? Give us your feedback. We've found that method to work really well, and we generally get pretty good community buy-in going through that process. And when we've had fairly large changes over the years, and rent policy would be one of them that you can get a lot of kickback on, that's generally the process we've taken that's worked in Lincoln. My 10 minutes are up, so I have one final point, and that is that this is a long-term change. When we started Moving to Work in the late 90s, it was a 5-year demonstration program. We're long past the 5-year demonstration program idea. I think the operations notice gives you a 20-year window to start out, and most of us who are in the Moving to Work world now don't think that we're ever going to change back, and certainly don't ever plan to change back. So what does that mean? It means you can think about long-term changes, and that you don't have to try to do everything at once. You have time. You can do a few things well, and then a few years later do a few more things. I think what you'll find is 5 or 10 years down the road, you're going to have, and your staff are going to have ideas and thoughts and potential partnerships with others in the community that you didn't think of when you started out. And you're going to have a whole new set of initiatives to work through. So take a long-term thought process. Good luck. We're really glad that you're applying and moving your way through the Moving to Work world, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much, Chris. Some really great tips in there that we'll circle back to. And now I'd like to turn it over to Karen, the MTW and Federal Policy Director in Boulder. Karen?
Hello, thank you. This is Karen with Boulder Housing Partners. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So Boulder Housing Partners has been an MTW agency since 2012. I believe we're one of the first agencies to have come on to come onto the program through the open competition. We are a smaller agency. We have about 1,200 between public housing and MTW vouchers. We have about 1,200. So if we can go to my first slide, please. So we have been kind of asked to talk about, like, where do we get our inspiration from? And first, I want to echo Chris's excitement about expanding the program, and we want to welcome all of you to the group. We can't wait to have more MTWers, as I call them. So it'll be really great to expand this program. So where do we as BHP get inspiration from? Because we came into the demonstration in 2012, we did look to the legacy agencies first to get ideas. Because because we are a smaller agency, at first it was very overwhelming to think about, oh wow, you know, here we have this blank slate, how are we going to fill it, what can we do? And so to give us some guidance and direction, we did look to the other MTW agencies. We then also started to look at our residents and our participants. We looked to them for ideas. You know, what don't you like about the program? You're the ones who are, you know, really the beneficiaries of the program, but also the ones who have to live by a lot of the rules and regulations. And so what is it about the program that you don't like? And interestingly enough, one of the things we found from our residents that they were really upset that people could pretty much cover up some income or lie about their income and get away with it. And so we actually went to using tax returns to prove income, and that idea actually came from our residents and participants. We also do staff quarterly brainstorming meetings where we just talk about what could we do differently, and you know, what can MTW do? Because I think what we found is that we have this huge long list of future ideas that we want to do, and we've realized that we don't actually need MTW to do a lot of those, but it's really caused us to become more creative as an agency. But the staff really feels empowered and are able to then, you know, bring up ideas about, well, what about this? And, you know, when I'm doing my job or when I'm talking to participants or residents, you know, this is a frustration I hear, and so how can we make that better for everybody? We also do reach out to our community partners and service agencies. We meet with them because we are serving the same clients in different ways or for different things. We do want to get together with our community partners and service agencies to talk to them about what can we do better? What ideas do you have that we can do that we could possibly change to make things easier for everybody involved? We can go to the next slide, please. So then we start talking about what are the obstacles that we've faced along the way. I am an overachiever by nature. I know this about myself. My boss knows this about me very well. And so I always want to do everything at once, which is really, really difficult. And like Chris said, if you've got 20 years in the demonstration, you're going to have time to do things and to do a few things well and really focus on a few things and do them well, and then do something, you know, more and something the next year or the next year. Really take your time and make sure that you're doing it well and not trying to do everything at once. That being said, I really wish that when we had done our rent reform, we would have looked at the utility allowance and tried to change that at the same time, but we decided not to, because what we also find is if we start to change one thing too many times in a row, then you get into change fatigue and people just get tired. And that's residents, that's participants, that's staff, that's supervisors, that's me who has to write the annual plan, the annual report. Change fatigue is real, and I think everybody can relate to that. Under COVID, change fatigue is real. So just be careful about how much change you make, but really think through the changes that you're making and try to make sure that you're getting all of it in there at the same time. The size of the agency is also an obstacle for us because we are a smaller agency and we don't have a huge pool of voucher holders, for example. We would love to do some type of shallow rent subsidy or shallow subsidy idea, but because our pool is so small, we're not quite sure how good the results would be from doing a small little one-off program like that. In addition to the fact that every little boutique program you do, it's like another new program. And so you kind of have to be careful about that. But some of the bigger agencies are doing some really incredible, remarkable things. And so just keep that in mind as you're thinking about what to do. And I believe the first cohort, or the majority of the new folks that are coming on, or agencies that are going to join us, are smaller agencies, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward. Another obstacle that is unique to BHP is we are one voucher administrator in Boulder County. So there are actually 3 housing authorities in the county, which I have no idea why that ever happened. And then we also have Mental Health Partners, which is the voucher administrator for the state division of housing vouchers. And so we have to be careful when we do things to make sure that we are not stepping on the other agency's toes by doing something that then landlords would want our voucher holders over all the other voucher holders. We don't want to pit one voucher holder against another, so we have to be careful in that respect. Go to the next slide, please. So how has MTW made us different? Again, we have become super creative. We view MTW as one tool in the toolbox that we have, and it's fascinating to think of all the wonderful ideas that have come up that people are like, yeah, we should do this. And it's like, that's great. We can do that anyway. We don't need MTW to do that. I think it has also made us a lot more thoughtful in the fact that we know better who we serve. The annual report, and I'm not sure if the new agencies are going to have to do an annual report, but we have metrics that we have to report on. And so we know more about our families now than we used to. Before, we would submit our 5058s into the PIC system, and off they went into that system. But now we know, we're in the data every year, really looking to see, okay, this is the activity we chose, this is the impact analysis we thought was going to happen. Did that happen? Did it really happen? Did it not happen? And so that's really helpful. I think it just really helps us better understand who we're actually serving, so we can focus more services to that targeted audience. We have become a better community partner with our residents and partners and participants. We involve our residents and participants in the design. It has allowed us the chance to really educate them on the program and the complexities of what we do and why we have to ask for so much information. And it's given them a better understanding of what we need to do and how to benefit from the program. It's made us a better community partner too. We bring our partners in to help us create activities. And one of the really cool things that has come out of this is, as an MTW agency, we were able to create a damage claim fund using MTW funds. And when we rolled this out, we went to our fellow housing authorities and said, hey, by the way, this is what we're doing. And they said, oh, wait, is there a way that we can make this a regional thing? So we've actually changed it, and we've created a landlord assurance fund, which is community-wide and covers every every voucher holder in Boulder County, which is just really super exciting. I believe I am close to my 10 minutes now, so I want to thank you. I want to echo Chris's sentiments that we are so excited to have everybody join us, and I am available for questions at the end of the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. You guys, a lot of really great tips for everybody. And our last legacy agency representative that I'd like to introduce is Jennifer Rainwater. And Jennifer was previously with the Housing Authority of the County of San Mateo in California. And during the pandemic, I think in March, she transitioned over to work with, onboarding, during a pandemic for the federal government, simple. And she now works with us at the HUD side. So she is going to be able to speak with you both from the perspective of an agency that has implemented it, and then also from the perspective from HUD. So Jenny, go ahead.
Excellent. Thanks, Marianne. And I don't know, after that introduction, everybody may question my judgment of deciding to make a major life change in the middle of a pandemic, but there you have it. So just thinking about the Moving Toward program in terms of working at an agency, I have to say that when we started, actually San Mateo started back in the late 90s with a pilot program. And I just want to double check, Marianne, can you see me and hear me?
I can definitely hear you, and yes, I can see you.
Excellent. Okay. So in San Mateo, Moving to Work started as a small pilot program, carve out of about 300 participants, and it was really designed way back at the beginning in concert with the welfare reform that was happening. So it was really targeted at increasing the self-sufficiency of folks that came on that were also welfare recipients. And that program did a beautiful job. It did have a time limit to it, but in the 2006, 2008, when we had the opportunity at that point to expand from that pilot to have it be for all participants, for our entire program, San Mateo jumped on board. And I think in many ways thought of that as really the beginning of Moving to Work for the agency as a whole. And so it was a reset moment at that time. And when we looked at it, we had ideas and thoughts about what we wanted to do, not just for the self-sufficiency participants, but just for the program as a whole. And so we really looked to our community, because it was for a county, and looked to the others who were also working with a similar population of just sitting down and talking to them about literally the question we kept asking over and over again was, what's working and what's not working? And so we really looked for those points where we came in conflict or in concert with others, and really we tried to tap it from current program participants and residents to advocates in our community, to representatives, to other county departments, other nonprofits. Really tried to take a broad brush and ask those same questions of everyone. And we actually received great information and found places where we were really divergent and it didn't make much sense. And so we were able to, with Moving to Work, make adjustments so we were functioning effectively in our community. I can say, and just thinking about how do you even begin, it just feels so overwhelming in many ways that I have to say, with the operations notice, with the cohort, with what is there, HUD really has made it easier. It's like when you have too many choices, you kind of get stuck. And with having really the outline of various waivers, it gives you a way to begin, a way to think about it, a way to use the information that you gather from your public process, from talking to people, a way to really think effectively. And I'll use this word even though we kind of overuse it in Moving to Work. You streamline that process because it really gives you some ways to think about it that you know have been effective in the past for others. And so you can take that and relate that to the information you're looking at. I will note that, as I was thinking about it, big pieces that came out, and Chris, I think you said this, how do you incentivize some things? And one of the things, it was a negative, but how do you remove disincentives for people to increase their income? What do you do to affect that change? How do you encourage asset growth and savings potentials? And how do you do that with what people often feel is a negative consequence of, if my income increases, my rent's going to go up. And so how do you deal with those pieces? And so as I was looking at the operations notice, and specifically Appendix 1, one of the first things is about tiered rent. So how could we take those pieces together, and with that waiver, be able to set up a system that would be easy to understand, that would encourage increases in earned income, that would not negatively impact the participant themselves. And so we started building with that, but it was really great, frankly, to have that idea already there in the notice. You had something, as I looked at it, I thought, wow, that would have been great if that had been there when we started, because you didn't have to recreate the wheel. It's already there. So how can you make it applicable in your community? How can you make it work? So I think you'll find that it's easy to understand. HUD has already laid out many things, and obviously you can see that I shifted over to HUD specifically also to see what could I do, how could I help? Because again, how often do we all, I'm saying we all because I'm saying I'm still at San Mateo, but how often do you have the chance to inform federal policy? And I think Chris Golden at the beginning talked about, things already came through HOPWA that were enacted and used in moving to work programs, such as, doing recertifications every other year or taking these various actions. These were tried and proved, and there was a lot of statistical data that showed this was effective. We want something to be effective, but also that the integrity of the program remains as you change and do some new and unique ideas and processes. So I know I'm talking fast, but I also know I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask the questions they may have. But this is a great opportunity. I'm glad you're all here. Obviously, as you come in various cohorts, I was talking about tiered rent, recognizing that I think cohort 2 is doing rent studies, and so there may be specific things that if you're here from cohort 2 that will be in the selection notice that you'll need to follow. But with great opportunity comes great responsibility. But it really is, I would say, a fantastic program and an opportunity to really make a difference in your local community. So with that, Marianne, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Awesome, Jenny. Thank you so much. And we are thrilled that you have come over to HUD. So we heard a lot of really good information tips from Chris and Karen and Jenny. So now I'm going to ask you guys a question. If you could go to the next slide. We are going to start our 2 engagement questions. The first one relating to, it's going to be a poll. So right now, Chantel's going to be putting up the polls that you should be able to enter it in. And the question is, have you read the MTW operations notice? It's all confidential, so we're not going to, see who said yes or who said no. I'm sure, I'm hoping that there's many of you that have read it cover to cover, have highlighted, have made notes, have questions for us. Others of you may have read pieces of it, maybe section 4 or appendix 1, preparing for today's conversation, and others haven't read it at all. So as I said, so ICF, they've opened the poll. So if you guys could put in that poll box, have you read the ops notice, cover to cover, highlighted, note cards, all of that. Some of it, maybe section 4, maybe appendix 1, maybe specific pieces, or not at all, which is a wonderful answer. So with that, Chantel, if you could let us know kind of what we've heard. And that's coming up. And again, a reminder that the ops notice is available on our website. There's a very clunky version of the ops notice in the Federal Register, which is, in the Federal Register format with the 3 columns and all of that. We took that same exact language and we reformatted it in a user-friendly document that is available. I call it the pretty version of the ops notice that's available on the website. And so with that, you can see that most people have at least several. About a third of you had read it cover to cover, gold star. Another third have read some of it. That's great to get started. For those of you that have not yet reviewed the ops notice, I definitely encourage you to go look at it, particularly relating to section 6 of the operations notice is the actual MTW, parts 1 through 5 are a lot of legal information that needs to be included in the Federal Register notice. Section 6 is the operations notice. So those 6 of you that have not yet read it, go back and take a look at it. Okay, thanks for playing with that first question. Second question, and for this question, we want to get people comfortable using the Q&A feature. So I'm going to ask you to type your answers into the Q&A box, which is, again, available on the right side of your screen. And for this question, we are asking you, what is your impetus for applying to moving to work? What are some of the overarching goals that you are hoping to achieve through your moving to work status? So if you could put that answer in the Q&A section, and I will kind of read off some of the, if I can figure out how to use this, Relief from federal regulations, absolutely, Alexander, that is a good one. Other thoughts as to why are you interested in MTW? To simplify the rent and to get rid of interims. Great, and a lot of our agencies are doing that. Thanks, Kimberly. Flexibility, streamlining, that's great. Thanks, Tammy. Cost effectiveness. And for cost effectiveness, I would think about, what do you mean by that? Do you mean for the agency, for the federal funds, for the participants? But absolutely, that's one of the 3 statutory objectives. So I'm guessing Cindy's read the ops notice. Monica, to ease our administrative burden and to make our program easier to understand for participants, absolutely. To simplify the rent goes along with the same way. To develop a program that benefits our community, and as Karen and Chris and Jenny talked about, MTW is a way to just think differently to benefit your families. So residents that are not fearful of rent increases based on employment, absolutely. Simplifying the program, encouraging self-sufficiency of residents, incentivize more earned income, streamlining the rent reform utility, streamlining increased FSS and TDV options. There's so many great, and all of these, it's yes, absolutely yes. Make it easier to administer, provide more flexibility to support residents and families to meet the local needs. To have no negative renter, periodic mandatory rent increases, increasing income incentives. To be creative. So all of these are yes, yes, absolutely. You know, they're achieving the 3 different statutory objectives of MTW: cost effectiveness, self-sufficiency, housing choice, that simplification, that creativity, a lot of really great reasons. And these reasons that you all are putting in here, absolutely, MTW can help you get to those spaces. And so now I would like to move on to the kind of a discussion. Next slide, please, which is just a discussion slide. We have several people on the line that are here to help answer questions. And so as a reminder, you can provide your questions in the Q&A box. And I did see that there were some questions already entered previously that I'm going to ask people to answer. And then also you can ask your questions verbally, and we're going to see how this goes, and we might adjust it for future webinars. But at this point, we're going to ask Chantel, if you could unmute all of the participants. So at this point, all of the participants will be, unmuted, and then from Chantel, and then we'll ask you individually to go back and to mute your personal devices so that we don't hear all of that feedback in the back. And as we hear feedback, or if we hear too much feedback, we might need to mute it all. But ideally, it'd be great if we could hear from some of you verbally as well. And to mute yourself, locate your name in the WebEx toolbar. I'm reading the directions here. Scroll over your name. You'll see a circle with a microphone on it. When the circle is red, you're muted. When it's gray, you're unmuted. If you fail to mute yourself, and if we hear your dog or you know, a lot of noise in the background, then we will go ahead and mute your phone also. Okay, that's a lot of logistics. Anyway, so at this point, we're going to move into the Q&A. Any questions that you guys have for any of our presenters or for HUD, let us know. Chris Golden from the MTW team is here to answer questions. Allison Christensen and John Kincannon from the MTW team are also here to answer questions. And then, of course, Chris and Karen and Jenny, goodness gracious, sorry, Jenny. Jenny are here to answer questions as well. So for the first question, I'm going to go back to Chris Lombardi. This is an easy question. Where are you? Lincoln, where?
Lincoln is in the paradise known as Nebraska. We're in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Lincoln, Nebraska. And can you talk about the size of your agency?
Yeah, we have 3,000 vouchers and about 1,500 HUD rental units. A couple hundred of our rental units are federal public housing. So we're, you know, one of the contexts for us is we're in terms of moving to work is we're primarily voucher focused. We're not really focused on public housing development issues because we don't have that many public housing units.
Thanks, Chris. And I am hearing some feedback, so I am going to ask folks to remember to put your phone on mute, and if we keep on hearing the feedback, I'm going to ask Chantel to put everybody on mute again. I don't want to do that. So Karen, and Jenny, could you talk a little bit, or Karen, I'm going to put this one to you. You talked a lot about needing to involve your residents and community partners. Can you talk about specific stakeholders that you need to remember to seek out? Obviously, you want to seek out the residents and the participating residents. What are some stakeholders that you might not think about?
So we involved our local legal aid. We also involved our local homeless shelter, our local mental health partners. We included a lot of our service partners, right? We have an Emergency Family Assistance Association that we involved. Our Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence. Kind of just those folks, and that you're working with the same clients, and so what is the best way that you can work together to serve the clients who not only need housing, but they need food stamps, and they need legal services, and may need mental health services. So we included everybody who touched our clients.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Allison, this one's for you. Don't forget to take your phone off of mute. What is the application process like?
There we go. Okay, hi, Marianne. So the application process is going to vary depending on what cohort you're applying to. For cohort 1, those materials are already available on our website. There is a letter of interest process followed by a letter. Cohort 2, similar letter of interest process. Those eligible applicants are now submitting applications according to a selection notice. So it will really depend on the cohort, how the application process goes. So encourage you to look at the selection notice for the cohort that you're interested in.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Allison. So both the selection notice as well as on HUD's website, we've created tools with all of the information that you need to know. And we showed that where to find that information before. Okay, what other questions here? Can a PHA adopt, okay, so Chris Golden, I'm going to send this one to you. Can a PHA adopt income-based Tier 1, actually no, Allison, this one might be to you for a cohort 2 question, I think. Adopt an income-based Tier 1 and a step-based rent Tier 2 for public housing. I'm not sure of that question. Can a PHA adopt income-based Tier 1 and step-based rent Tier 2 for public housing?
So it's a little bit of a difficult question to ask. I think the best thing to do for the specific competition questions related to cohort 1 and 2 would be to email our help desk FAQ line. So for cohort 2, that would be cohort 2 at HUD.gov, and I guess could we get it's available on our website as well. I think that would probably be the best thing because I'm not totally clear on the question. You have to, I guess, you have to pick one of the rents for cohort 2. So you can't pick one for public housing and one for vouchers. You'd have to pick if you'd want test rent 1, test rent 2, or test rent 3. I don't know if that answers the question.
Right. I think that does answer the question, and I think the key to this specific question is please check out, obviously check the cohort 2 website and the selection notice. It's not totally clear what the question is based on what we're seeing here. So Edward, I would ask if you could submit your question into the MTW cohort 2 at HUD.gov, and Allison will send you a response. Great. So this is a question for Chris Lombardi and Karen and Jennifer. What software systems were you guys using?
So Karen and Boulder, we are using Yardi.
Great. Thanks, Karen and Boulder.
This is Chris. So we're using TinMaster MRI, and software is an interesting conversation. It can be a limiting factor on what you're trying to do. So it is something you have to take into account and look at pretty closely.
Yeah. Back at the beginning, San Mateo was using Emphasis, and I don't remember which version. It was the older version, not Elite, but it was Emphasis. It was pretty old, and then they converted to Yardi probably back in 2012, I want to say, and that's where they are now.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yep.
This is another question for Karen and Chris Lombardi. What is the main local need that your agency is focusing on now? Chris?
Our main local need that we're focusing on is trying to expand the supply of affordable housing, particularly ones that will take vouchers. And in some ways, we are using some moving to work authority around that, but in other ways, we're not. We're doing development and partnering with people to do new developments unrelated to moving to work. But we have tried to incorporate more landlord incentives into our program in recent years to try to make the program more attractive to landlords taking vouchers. There's not a requirement in Lincoln or in Nebraska for landlords to accept vouchers, and so that's a big deal like it is across the country. It's a really tight rental market, and our folks have trouble finding places in that market.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Karen?
I would echo that, although in the city of Boulder, they did pass an ordinance about 6 months ago that did implement a source of income discrimination, and that is also being taken up on the state level in Colorado. But we, as a college town, have very high market rents and have that same issue, and so that is definitely our main focus now, using MTW to incentivize landlords to participate in the program, but also using our MTW flexibility to develop or acquire local non-traditional affordable units as well.
Great.
Hey, Marianne, this is Jennifer. Can I add one more thing? Because housing in San Mateo, which is the San Francisco Bay Area, is just insanity, frankly. And so there was an incentive program developed, but one of the things that ended up being actually the most popular of all of them was people ended up calling it the no red tape, but it eliminated any kind of delay, because everyone assumed that any delays to begin a HAP contract were due to the housing authority. Well, in actuality, many times it was because the landlord didn't return the required information, like the signed lease or their bank information to be able to send payments. And so we called it the no loss bonus. And so when we received a signed RTA from a landlord, we said, okay, we understand you are serious about this. And so we actually, once they did sign and return all the paperwork we needed, we backdated the start of that contract to the date that they turned in the RTA, provided that the unit passed an HQS inspection. And that ended up being an incredibly popular, and it was something that would change their mind, so that a subsidized participant was no different than anybody walking in off the street, that they could start that contract the same day, provided that that unit was ready to go. So just that was another piece that was in San Mateo that ended up being able to do because of moving to work, so, and effective.
That's awesome. Great. That was a great question, and thanks for the feedback, everybody. Allison, I'm going to send a couple more your way. The first one I think everybody will be interested in. I'm having trouble with the implementation timeline. And for Allison, if you can remind people what that is and where to find it. How fast will HUD approve Cohort 1 applications and allow the agency to begin MTW activities.
Okay.
Allison.
Sure. Yep. So the best place to look for the most current timelines is you'll hear us say this a lot, the MTW website. If you go to HUD.gov/MTW, you'll see our MTW expansion page, and there you'll see the timeline for when we plan to publish notices and select all of the different cohorts. For, I think, cohort 1 and 2 agencies are the ones who are active now. So cohort 1 applications are due December 4th, and cohort 2 is due January 8th. So from that time, I think even on the timeline, there should be an estimate of when we plan to make announcements for both of those 4 cohorts. And generally, it's the beginning of 2021. So in the, I think we say spring of 2021. And from there, once you're offered designation from HUD to become an MTW agency, there's a couple steps that need to happen before you're an active MTW agency. So the timeline will all depend on how quickly your agency completes those steps. So the first most important step is the signing of the MTW ACC amendment. So your agency would sign that, do the requisite board actions, and then send 2 copies of that document back to HUD for countersignature. That would go through our concurrence process and be signed by officials at HUD. And once you have that countersigned, you're an official MTW agency. So at that point, you would be able to be spending funds flexibly across the Section 8 and Section 9 programs. You still wouldn't be able to do any of the waivers that we talked about today. In order to do that, you'd have to complete the MTW supplement to the PHA plan. So, and there's a public process and approval process associated with that. So it really depends on how quickly your agency is able to convene those board meetings and get those documents ready and submitted to HUD. And then, you know, you can always work in a couple months, usually, you know, might want to be generous review time for HUD, and that should give you a general sense of when your implementation timeline would be. And then also keep in mind, we understand these are just estimates, so if they don't go totally according to plan, that's fine. Really what we're looking for in the application is just what you are seeking as an agency to be doing with your MTW status first, how you're going to use your flexibility once you become an MTW agency. So we understand that timelines are flexible and you won't be penalized in any way should you not, you know, meet the benchmarks that are in that timeline in the application.
Great, thanks, Allison. And I think you just answered this question from Teresa about, do we need to be specific in the MTW plan waivers or to be used? Do we need to be specific in the MTW plan which waivers will be used, or can we create the vision to submit to HUD and then implement that vision? And I think what's being asked for is, do you have to be specific in your application as to which specific waivers you'll be using? I think it's
sure.
a question.
Yep, and you do not need to be specific. So in the MTW plan and application that you're submitting on either December 4th or January 8th, you do not need to include these waivers specifically. You can talk more generally about the types of activities that you're looking to pursue, or the, you know, the goals of your agencies, and talk more generally in that way. And then once you submit the MTW supplement to the PHA plan, that's when you'll really get into that specificity of the specific waiver numbers that we talked about today.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Allison. And there are a couple other cohort 2 specific questions for Allison that I think would be better if we turn them into FAQs and put them on our HUD website hopefully by next week. One relating to, can we mandate FSS under control cohort 2? And then the second question about clarifying whether we can apply waivers 1, 3, 6, 7, 8, 12 to households not in the control or treatment groups. And Allison, if you, unless you can answer those quickly, I would suggest that we respond, take a closer look at those questions and respond in FAQs.
I think so, yeah. Just since they're so specific, I'd want to take a look at them. We also work closely with our partners in TDNR, so we like to talk amongst those things. I wouldn't want to give anybody false information on this. So yeah, probably through the FAQ would be the best. And as Marianne said, we have that web update almost ready to go. So be looking out very soon for an update on the website with new FAQs.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to see if there's any other questions, if you could put them in the chat box. We have had to mute a number of the lines because we're getting a lot of background noise. So if you do have any additional questions or comments or feedback, please put that in the chat. And while you guys are continuing to think about some more questions or comments, I would like to note, and Allison, please weigh in here. Somebody, I think it was Chris, talked about the 20-year term limit for the expansion agencies. For any of the waivers that are restricted to do a specific cohort-specific evaluation for cohort 2, they would be restricted only for the period of the evaluation. And then after that, the agency would have access to all of the MTW waivers after that. So I hope that helps.
In the evaluation period is slightly different for each cohort. So in that selection notice, it'll tell you, the evaluation window is 5 years or 60, whatever it is. So look to your specific selection notice, and that'll give you the number of years. Those restricted waivers.
So this next question, I'm going to send it first to Karen and Chris and Jenny, and then I'm going to send it to Allison. So the question for the legacy agencies, the PHA has historically low participation in the public process despite outreach efforts. This has been a chronic problem in the jurisdiction. So my question to you guys is, do you have any great tips on how to beef up the participation in outreach?
So this is Karen in Boulder. We have found that food is always really great. When you offer food, people will show up. So a lot of our resident advisory committee meetings are done usually early evening, where we offer dinner. We have also offered gift cards to Target for people to come and share their experience or share their thoughts with us. I think a lot of it just has to do with education. Like, why are you inviting them? What do you want to know? What's the reason for them showing up? And I think once they understood that we really listen to them and we really are interested in their opinion and would like to hear it and have them be part of the process and part of the change, people were jumping at the chance to be part of our resident advisory committee.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, Karen took my first answer, which was food. That's the key to always getting people to show up. Hopefully there'll be a post-pandemic where we can do that again. We specifically try to recruit resident advisory board members. We encourage our staff to recruit people they know within our resident community to our resident advisory board, and we're putting that together. Our family self-sufficiency staff is particularly good at that. Our leasing staff is good at that. So we try to recruit people, similar things to what Karen said, and then we have a lot of returnees because I think they enjoy both the food at the meetings and the topics at the meetings. We also, if you have resident councils at any of your properties, our resident councils always put members on our board, and so outside of our standard recruitment efforts.
Great. And then Allison, I'm going to pitch the second half of the question to you. Will the PHA be penalized so long as it has taken reasonable efforts to engage the community and stakeholders?
Sure. So yeah, we don't have food on our FAQ, but if you look at the FAQs for both cohort 1 and 2, you'll see some ways to try and engage people, especially in light of COVID. They were shared as a part of the CARES Act FAQ. And there's some really good ideas on unique ways to get in touch with people and engage with their community in there. So encourage you to look at those. So again, it's a little different for cohort 1 and cohort 2. Overall, in the MTW program, I think you've heard here today, and you've heard probably on other presentations as well, that community engagement is really essential in creating a successful program. So that's why we have such an emphasis on it. In our selection notices, we want to make sure to get you all off to a good start on community engagement. So for cohort 1, there's no, the community engagement's not scored. So it's just taking the specific steps. If you take those steps, then you will have a passing application. It's not, you get an A or a B. It's just a pass-fail exercise. And then for cohort 2, if you look at the scoring criteria in the back of the selection notice, you'll see the points that are assigned for resident engagement. And there you'll see that the agency is awarded points according to how they sought comments from residents and sought input from the community, and how they dealt with that input that was received. So there's no points awarded for, you know, you got 10 people at the meeting or anything like that. It's how you as an agency are seeking out that comment. So
great. Thanks, Allison. So are there any other last questions? So for any of the questions that are really kind of specific to one of the cohorts, please keep an eye out on our website, and we'll be updating the FAQs to respond to any of those questions soon in the near future. And then I think at this point, I would like to turn to the next, start closing this out. If you want to move to, oh yeah, Karen.
So I was just scrolling through the question and answer and noticed a comment during one of the polls that I would just like to address. There was a poll answer that said something about eliminating interims, and so I also had that thought that we would be eliminating a lot of interims, and especially when we went to a no interims policy along with biennial and triennial certifications. And I don't mean to be a wet blanket, but I am going to inject a dose of reality, is that our voucher participants live in the real world in the marketplace, and landlords want to have a contract rent increase every year at the lease renewal. And so while we thought we weren't going to be doing, we thought we were not going to be touching the files every year, we have found that we are still touching the files almost every year for folks. It's just a matter of how deeply or how much are we touching the file. So we do a recertification 1 year, and then we don't do a recert for 3 years, but those intervening 2 years, we are doing a contract rent increase, which is an interim, and it is work. It is less work than a full recert, but my bubble got burst a little bit when I was originally dreaming MTW going, woo, we're not gonna have to do that many interims, and that is unfortunately something we didn't think all the way through. And so again, I'm not trying to bust anybody's bubble, but just adding that dose of reality that we still work with private landlords who do want that contract rent increase. And in our market, we would not be able to tell landlords that they could not request an increase for 3 years. That would not, nobody would want to work with the program then. So just wanted to throw that out there. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. And I guess on that note, I'm going to send, we got one more question, and I'm going to send this over to Chris Golden. Chris Golden, can the PHA design or apply specific waivers that apply only to the RAD PPV units in a single project?
Sure. You can create boutique programs if you want for various reasons. It can be a lot of work because you're doing something different in a small area, but there are plenty of good reasons to do that, and our agency has done that in the past. That's fine.
Yep, great, thanks. Okay, so great comments, great questions. If you could transition to the next slide, I would be want to just point out some of the important resources that we have for you guys. And as I'm kind of walking through this, I would like to actually, I'm so sorry, Chris, Karen, Jenny, any last minute pearls of wisdom?
I would just say that if anybody's really interested and would like to chat further, I am available, and I think my information is in the slides someplace. Other than that, don't be afraid. It's a great program. It's super exciting. Please come join us.
Awesome. Chris?
Hey, Marianne, I would just jump in and say I would agree with Karen on that. The one thing I would just say, be patient. Don't try to do it all at once, and also be ready to be patient with your staff, because this is going to create profound change for them as well, not just the participants. And sometimes change is really scary, and that patience is just needed, and also just a repetition with them, because again, they're they're used to having this set of rules, and they're used to being able to use the phrase, well, HUD told me I have to do this, it's in the regulations. So they have to find a new way of talking about it and the reasons why they're doing things. And that ends up being a really, that's something you're going to be talking with them a lot about. So, but it is a great opportunity.
That's great. Important to keep in mind. Chris, any last pearls of wisdom?
Those 2 pearls were perfect. My email's on the set of slides, so feel free to email me if you'd so choose. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. Great. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Chris, Karen, Jenny, Chris, Allison, everybody on the line. I would be interested in hearing if you guys could type into the Q&A, if all the attendees at the PHAs could all type into the Q&A, how did you find this session? We're planning on doing several more kind of training series, both while you're in the process of applying and then also once PHAs are designated, and we want to make sure that we are doing them, that they're as useful as possible. So I would ask if you could let us know, for all of you on the phone today, if you could let us know in that Q&A box if you have any suggestions for how we might, topics you don't want to hear about, or how we might improve the training going forward in the future. That would be really helpful. And on this page, there are so many resources available on our webpage. So if you just go straight MTW webpage, HUD.gov/MTW. If you go to our expansion page, there's a whole host of information there. You'll find the links to the operations notice. You'll find links to the MTW ATC amendment, to the prior versions of the not yet final supplement. A lot of information there. You can go to our training series on the HUD Exchange website, and that training series, what that does is you'll see, some of these folks again, and you will, it basically breaks down the operations notice and really simplifies it. The operations notice, again, I encourage you to look at the reformatted pretty version of the ops notice that's up on our website, and print that out and hold it close and become familiar with it. And then for those of you in Cohort 1, I encourage you to go to the Cohort 1 page. And for those of you that are applying for Cohort 2, I encourage you to go to the Cohort 2 page, and there's pretty much any information that you could possibly need, you can find there. And if the information is not there, you can shoot us an email and we will respond. So next slide, please. So this slide talks about what's coming next. So today we talked about the waivers and a whole bunch of other things. And again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website, so you'll see that, and as well as any questions that were included in the chat that we were not able to answer. We will update the FAQs to the particular cohort. The funding flexibility, funding calculation, and statutory requirement session is coming up on October 28th. So we recommend you registering for that, get your CFOs to register for that, become familiar with that piece. And then on November 18th, just before Thanksgiving, we're going to have an office hours session. And during that office hours session, we want to hear from you. Is there anything specific that you have questions about that we can answer? And again, since we're in the middle of a competition, we can't answer agency-specific questions, but we can answer kind of general questions that you have relating to MTW, the expansion, or the application. And as a reminder, I'm sure these dates are, burned deep in your mind. The due dates for Cohort 1, the applications are due on December 4th. And for Cohort 2, those applications are due on January 8th, 2021, which is incredible that it's really not that far away at this point. And let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, So with that, I just wanted to say thank you for your interest in MTW. This has been a really, really great session. It's been really good to hear all of your questions, and your energy came out even though we weren't able to talk, just by the questions that you were asking. And again, many thanks to Chris and Karen and Jenny and Chris and Allison and the other presenters as well. But thank you guys so much. We're thrilled that we are moving forward with the MTW expansion, and we look forward to talking with you guys again at the next time. So thanks a lot. Have a great one, everybody.